To understand the sun in the sixth house, we should just take a second to make sure that we understand the sun and the sixth house. So let's do a quick review first of what the sixth house is all about. As you can see here, the sixth house literally physically is the part of the sky that's just below the western horizon. Everything that the sixth house symbolizes can be summarized by the phrase supporting the west. So in other words, whatever the west or the sunset symbolizes, the sixth house symbolizes things that support that. The sunset symbolizes disappearance. The sixth house, therefore, symbolizes everything that leads to disappearance or supports disappearance. This is why it's the house of confusion, not being able to see things. And another meaning of disappearance is death. Sunset signifies death. So sixth house signifies things that support death or lead to death. That's illness. Now, the seventh house or the sunset also signifies other people. And so the sixth house is about things which support other people, things which benefit other people in contrast to things which benefit you. This is why it's the house of your enemies. Enemies don't support you. They're against you. They support somebody else. So the sixth house has to do with enemies, enmity itself, and dealing with enemies. So the sixth house is a place for fighting. Another sense of supporting other people is to work for them, work for their benefit. So the sixth is a house of duties, service, chores, work. And it's the house of debt because it's the house of what you owe to other people, what you have to give to other people. And so service, servitude, indebtedness, indenturedness, etc. So that was a good quick review of what the sixth house is all about. Let's do a similar thing really fast for what the sun is all about. The sun symbolizes the soul, which means awareness, because the sun is very, very bright. And brightness or light facilitates awareness of things. So the sun is the planet that represents vision and visibility. Because it represents visibility, it has to do with the public side of your life, the visible side of your life. How public are you? How well known are you? How famous are you? How willing are you to be public? How extroversive are you? Or in short, how male are you? How outgoing or outward are you? And because the sun has to do with vision, it has to do with command, leadership, authority, having vision, enforcing vision, and so on. Soul also implies identity. And so this is why the sun has to do with the self, the ego, the identity, and the self-esteem. And by extension, the sun just represents the self of anything. So in other words, the core, the centrality of a thing, or the stability, the core of a thing is very stable. And finally, soul is the thing which gives life and animates something. So the sun has a lot to do with our health and our vitality. Now, let's compare the sun and the sixth house and see what things they have in common or maybe directly opposite. So the main thing, the very, very, very important thing, it's so important that it's almost a fundamental principle of interpretations in astrology, is that the sun and the sixth house get along very well because their basic natures are very complementary. The sun is maleness, and the sixth house is fighting. Men are good at warfare and fighting. So basically, to put a male tough planet like the sun in a male tough house like the sixth is overwhelmingly good. Similarly as putting a soft feminine planet in a soft feminine house would be overwhelmingly good. And then what's really bad is when you mix the two, when you cross the two. So what we want to do with our interpretations of the sun in the sixth house is bear in mind that the fundamental of it is very synergistic. To have a dominant, assertive male planet in the house that deals with our enemies is a good thing. So basically, the interpretation is that these natives with the sun in the sixth house, they know how to fight. They fight well, they fight efficiently. It doesn't mean that they fight too much. It doesn't mean that they fight a lot. It means they fight well. If you're not scared of fighting, you're strong, you're brave. The reason why they're not scared of fighting is because they know how to win. They overcome their opponents. They overcome their obstacles. They're successful because of this. The next thing that we should evaluate about the sun in the sixth house is that the sun has to do with vision, but the sixth has to do with confusion. On the surface, that seems to be a clash. It seems to be an opposite thing. But we want to turn this around and interpret it as a synergy, because the maleness of the sun fundamentally and the toughness of the sixth house fundamentally is making things go right with the sun in the sixth house. So what we want to do with this issue of the planet of vision being in the house of confusion is we want to use a positive twist on it. And we say, these people are clear. They're confident. They're intelligent. They see things clearly. They have clear-cut definitions of things. In that sense, they're intelligent. They're not confused. They're not doubtful. They know what they want, and they know how to get it. Another thing is that the sun is about leadership, but the sixth house is about indebtedness and servitude. So again, that seems to be a clash, but we want to turn it around and interpret it as a positive thing. So people with the sun in the sixth house, they're leaders. They tend to be obeyed, or at least followed. They tend to be respected. They are not submissive or subordinate people. They're dominant and assertive. And the last thing that I want to mention is that the sun is the planet of health, and the sixth house is the house of illness. And again, that looks like it's a clash, but since it's a subtext for the main thing, which is maleness in that house of enemies, then we're going to put this in a positive light too. Although this one is the weakest of the conversions to a positive light because it has the least to do with the maleness dynamic. You see, these other things, vision, confusion, clarity, it's a male trait. Clarity. Men can be overly clear sometimes and can be overly simplistic in their quick decisions. Leadership, dominance, assertion, extroversion, men have this trait. It can become too much sometimes. You get this concept of mansplaining, etc. So these two things that we looked at before, they're very related to the gender thing of the sun, the maleness being welcome in this house. So we really want to not consider vision versus confusion to be a clash. We don't want to consider leadership versus servitude to be a clash. Health and illness is not really so related to this gender thing. So we can turn this around as a positive interpretation, but with less force or less certainty. We should basically expect that people with the sun in the sixth house would be healthy and attractive, but it's not as difficult to overturn this particular part of the interpretation from other stuff in the chart. Now we have a pretty good theoretical understanding of what the sun does in the sixth house, how we should interpret the sun in the sixth house. Let's try to polish this up and sharpen it up by looking at 3 charts that have the sun in the sixth house and asking how well these interpretations work in these actual charts. So let's start with the basic thing that the sun in the sixth house indicates a person who can fight well, they're strong, they're brave, they are successful because they overcome their opponents. The 3 charts that I have to illustrate sun in the sixth house is Aretha Franklin, Lionel Messi, and Russel Brand. Was Aretha Franklin strong, brave, etc.? Yes. Why is she such a good example of the sun in the sixth house? Well, it's the sun in the sixth house by itself and exalted. If a planet is in a house exalted and by itself, that really helps to actually get the interpretations to come true in a very clear way and in a very good form. Additionally, her sun is the 10th Lord in the sixth house, which also brings the Lord of confidence, the Lord of extroversion, the Lord of maleness into this. Furthermore, in addition to having a very good sun, she has a very good moon, a moon in its own sign in the 9th house. So her personality indicators, sun and moon, are getting to be very strong or solid. Now, how about Lionel Messi? Is he a good example of somebody who fights well? So of course, he's a super successful athlete. That's all athletes do all day long is fight. So how come it's so applicable for Lionel Messi as well? First of all, his son in his sixth house is very influential in that house. It's very close to the degree of the ascendant, which means that it's very close to the cusp of this whole sign house. So what the closer that a planet is to the cusp of its house, the more strongly that interpretation should be taken. Secondly, his fifth lord is in his sixth house as well, Mercury, and his sixth lord, Moon, is in his fifth house. So he has a house exchange of Parivartana between the fifth and the sixth houses. So not only is his sun in the sixth house, but his sixth house is in an exchange with the fifth. This is a good yoga for athletes and warriors because it gives martial or strategic intelligence. It gives intelligence about how to deal with problems. Furthermore, he also has Mars in the sixth house, which is also good to put another masculine planet in this masculine house. And that Mars is also the third lord and the 10th lord. So those are masculine lordships. And to have the third lord in the sixth house is also very, very helpful to a warrior or an athlete. Now, finally, how about Russel Brand? Is he able to fight well? Is he strong, brave? Does he overcome opponents' obstacles? Yes, super. That's his personality. He's very unassailable. So next to his sun in the sixth house, he also has the sixth lord. So not only is the sun in the sixth house, the sixth lord is in the sixth house, and not only is the sun in the sixth house, the sun is with the sixth lord. His sun is the eighth lord in the sixth house, which gives him a kind of critical strength, like a subversive strength. Lionel Messi has that as well, has the eighth lord in the sixth house, which gives him the same thing, but in his context of being an athlete, it gives him the ability to see through your bluffs. The second trait about the sun in the sixth house was supposed to be a person who's very clear, not confused, very confident and intelligent. Does Aretha Franklin match that? Yeah. She's very clear about exactly what she wanted to do, and she overcome great odds in getting it. That's what I said about this kind of confidence. I know what I want, and I know how to get it, and I'm going to get it. So reasoning for that would be everything that we already talked about previously, all those same factors. Her intellect might not be her defining characteristic because her fifth house has a debilitated Mercury in it. So it's not going to be the kind of intellect where this is a person that debates very well or stuff like that. It's more of a quiet intellect. She's considered a genius of her art. Lionel Messi is a very clear, confident, intelligent, certainly. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to play sports well. Again, that same issue of 5 and 6, that's what I was saying. Get this intelligence or clarity for fighting, for dealing with opponents. Russel Brand, is he very intelligent? Probably of the three, he would be the most. Why? It's because his first lord and his fifth lord are joined in the seventh house, aspecting the first house. Another thing we said about the sun in the sixth house is that you get leaders, people who are obeyed, respected, dominant, assertive. Aretha Franklin, she's respect. She's the singer of respect. So yeah. But then you can say, but she's singing that she wants respect, so maybe she didn't really get it. Her fame and everything is kind of complex because her first lord and her fifth lord are joined, which is actually just like Russel Brand's. But her fifth and first lord are joined in the eighth house, whereas Russel Brand was in the seventh and aspecting the ascendant. So you get a person who is very intelligent and who is very confident and who is very respected, certainly, but doesn't really look like that type of person, doesn't really act like that type of person, doesn't really have a strident attitude. The eighth house is more like behind the scenes and covered. In addition, she has Saturn aspecting her ascendant, which tends to give self-negativity. So that self-negativity is competing with the self-confidence. Lionel Messi, on the other hand, is just more clearly, simply dominant and assertive and getting people's respect. This is because his first lord isn't in his 8th house. It's aspecting his ascendant from the 11th. And on top of that, it is in a mutual aspect with the 4th and 9th lord, which is a Raja Yoga for the first lord. So Aretha Franklin also has a Raja Yoga for her first lord, but it's in the 8th house. Lionel Messi has a Raja Yoga for his first lord in the 11th house, where it aspects the ascendant. And that was also the case for Russel Brand. So in order to get the interpretation of having a lot of self-confidence, etc., besides having the sun in the 6th house, you also want to look at the 1st house, because the 1st house also represents self. In the cases of Lionel Messi and Russel Brand, you have super powerful 1st houses because the first lord is in Raja Yoga aspecting the 1st house. In Aretha Franklin's case, you almost have that. You have the first lord in a Raja Yoga, but it's not aspecting the 1st house, and instead Saturn is aspecting the 1st house. So for her, it's a little bit more toned down. The final thing that we mentioned was healthy and attractive. Aretha Franklin, yes and no. Again, I'm not a person that's a fan of making weight seem like it's unattractive, but weight past a certain point can be unhealthy. So I think she had weight issues as well. So the health and beauty of Aretha Franklin is there, and it's also not there. Again, this has to do with her first lord being in the 8th house. And if you look at it very carefully, her first lord is in the 8th house. So is her second lord, which is very important for health and diet. And so is her 6th lord, which is very important for health. So in her case, the exalted sun in the 6th house is giving beauty and health, but it's competing with having the 2nd and 6th lords in the 8th house. And of course, as we previously mentioned, having Saturn aspect the ascendant. Lionel Messi, on the other hand, is an athlete, so there's no question about being super healthy. And he's a very handsome fellow. So again, that goes right back to the importance of the 1st house. If you want to see if somebody's healthy or if you want to see if they're attractive, it's not just the sun. It's the 1st house, and his 1st house is great because his first lord is aspecting the ascendant while in a Raja Yoga. And that's the same thing with Russel Brand. Really handsome guy, pretty healthy, and so he has that same thing with the first lord being in a Raja Yoga while aspecting the ascendant. I would say only pretty healthy because the 6th house is a little bit weird with K2 in it. So I hope that you now have a good basic understanding of what the sun represents, what the 6th house represents, how to basically work with the interpretation of the sun in the 6th house, and how in 3 specific cases it took 3 specific forms. If you want to actually have my interpretations for all of your placements in your chart, you can go to my website and order that from the charts page. It's victorcara.com/R2. Thank you so much.